When is the purchase price not actually the purchase price in an M&A transaction? And it turns out in almost every transaction, there is an adjustment provision that allows the parties to adjust the purchase price from what's paid at closing to reflect the condition of the business after the closing. And what that really gets at is that the parties, the buyer in particular, is expecting something to be delivered to them at closing, and they may not actually receive exactly what they thought. The parties sometimes will pick a very specific item, like, did this contract get signed and delivered? And if it did, purchase price stays the same, and if it didn't, there'll be an adjustment downward. But more typically, there's a broad adjustment based on working capital, which is the difference between short-term assets and short-term liabilities. And the reason for that is, let's say you had a nefarious seller and they had agreed to a purchase price with a buyer, and between the time that they agreed on that and the deal actually closed, the seller decided to accelerate the payment of receivables, beg all of their customers to pay early and to get that cash in the door. And at the same time, they held off paying their payables and stretched their payables longer than usual. After the closing, the buyer would come into the transaction, into the company to run the business, and realize that they had less cash coming in than they anticipated, that historically would have been the case. And they're saddled with a whole bunch of obligations to keep the business going that they otherwise would not have had. It's not a fair deal. And so to keep everybody honest in the transaction, we use a working capital adjustment, and that way there's no gamesmanship. It doesn't really matter if you accelerate your receivables or slow down your payables, because that'll be adjusted out of the purchase price after the deal closes.